Hello, beautiful black people. I hope that all is well in your world. And this day, progress very, very well for you and all of your wonderful, wonderful black, beautiful, intelligent loved ones. Beautiful black people, know this. I have used this principle most of my life. I believe, looking back down the road of my life, I probably started thinking about these things when I was 11 or 12 years old. And that principle is, if it is not making you happy, if it is not making you better, and if it is not making you money, then let it go. Let it go. If it does not make you happy, if it does not make you better, and if it does not make you money, then let it go, my beautiful, intelligent black brothers and sisters. There are deeply rooted inequalities. And today, on the 31st of July of the year 2020, again, these racial inequalities are bursting again onto the center stage of the American consciousness. And the operative word is consciousness, my beautiful, intelligent black brothers and sisters. It is likened to the capture of runaway slaves in the 19th century. It is likened to the murder, the public lynching of George Floyd, and many other unarmed black folks in recent months. And it has brought back to us the deep, very deep inequalities that are too easy for many white Americans to ignore. There are a myriad of ideals, mostly by white folks. Those are the ones that make it to the television screen, to the magazines, etc., etc. There are a myriad of ideals for how to move forward and represent the entire spectrum of views on race and policing race and policing in these so-called United States. Nonetheless, one thing that almost all will agree on is that the death of black folks at the hands of racist white cops are just one symptom of a far more deeper system of inequalities The COVID-19 pandemic has exposed the deep depth of those racial inequalities. The unfortunate fact is that there's no one cause, and therefore there is not one solution. Racism in these so-called United States is very complex, and it is definitely multifaceted. It's multifaceted. And you will make a mistake to describe any single reform as an overall solution. There is no single reform that will be an overall solution. Economic measures, and know this, my beautiful, intelligent black brothers and sisters, economic measures are not a panacea. They never have been. Improving material circumstances will not cure the racial biases, implicit biases of 7 out of every 10 white folks. And during the era of Trump, many of those racial biases are explicit now. They are no longer implicit biases. In the era of Trump, they have become explicit biases. They are out there. A knee on George Floyd's neck for more than 9 minutes, suffocating him in plain sight. Not one cop, but 4 cops. Not one cop, but 4 cops, my beautiful, intelligent black brothers and sisters. These measures are insufficient. Economic solutions are necessary. Economic solutions are necessary. Reparations are necessary. Reparations are necessary. The federal government owes black folks, people that look like me, reparations. I am the direct descendants of slaves. My grandfathers, my great-grandfathers, my grandmother, my great-grandmother. I am a direct descendant of slaves, my beautiful, intelligent black brothers and sisters. Economic solutions are necessary for making progress on racism in these so-called United States. The material conditions of our black communities reflect and perpetuate centuries of racism. Don't allow white folks to tell us that we are directly responsible for the conditions of some black communities, the dilapidated conditions. We are not responsible. We are not responsible. The material conditions of black communities reflect and perpetuate centuries of racism imposed on black folks by racist, delusionist white folks. And thus, those conditions need to be addressed. That's what needs to be addressed as part of any effort to root out continued systemic racism. There have to be an economic solution. If not, it would take 230 years for us to catch up economically when compared to where white folks are economically today, my beautiful, intelligent black brothers and sisters. This is what Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was talking about in his 1967 speech, and it was entitled, "Where Do We Go From Here?" Dr. MLK Jr. was insisting on the elimination of poverty as a tool, and to eliminate that poverty requires reparations, my beautiful, intelligent black brothers and sisters. Poor folks transform into purchasers. It requires an economic solution. Poor folks transform into purchasers will do a great deal on their own to alter housing decay. And black folks that have a double disability will have a greater effect on discrimination when they have the additional weapon of cash to use in their struggle. To eliminate racism, to eliminate poverty in black communities require an economic solution. It's not only an economic solution, but an economic solution must be part of the plan. You must find a way to put cash in the hands of black families in black communities. And that cash in the hands of black families will become a weapon used to lift black folks out of poverty, to help them get through the struggle, the storm that black folks have been in since the inception of this plantation called America. It is no coincidence that Dr. King approvingly cites Henry George. His name is Henry George. And he did some work. Henry George did some work. And it was called Progress and Poverty. It was called Progress and Poverty. Henry George was not primarily a racial reformer. And while his own views on race were far ahead of most of his white counterparts, Henry George's views were still imperfect. His views were still imperfect. Nonetheless, he set out a comprehensive economic vision for the elimination of poverty from our society. Both Henry George and Dr. King understood the ramifications of poverty and social problems and its specific understanding of land and economic rent are needed to help bring about a much greater material equality in these United States. Did you get that? The 40 acres and a mule our ancestors never got. Henry George and Dr. King are saying that black folks should own land. Black folks should be given land in these United States. The first and perhaps the most fundamental truth, T-R-U-T-H, that Henry George laid out for the 19th century Americans, and which still must be grasped today, is that poverty is not natural. Again, poverty is not natural. Mr. George professed that poverty is indeed a symptom of profound injustices that have been levied against black folks, people that look like me, since the inception of this plantation called America. Poverty is a crime, Mr. George wrote. Poverty is a crime, Mr. George wrote. The thing of things I should like to show is that poverty is a crime. That is what Henry George said. The thing of things I should like to show is that poverty is a crime. And he went on to explain, I do not mean that it is a crime to be poor. No, it is not a crime to be poor. But economic marginalization intentionally is a crime. Murder is a crime. But it is not a crime to be murdered. Do you get it? Murder is a crime, but it is not a crime to be murdered. Poverty is a crime, but it is not a crime to be poor. That's the correlation, my beautiful, intelligent black brothers and sisters. And a man who is in poverty, Henry George said, I look upon not as a criminal himself, rather I see him as the victim of a crime for which others, racist white folks, have inflicted, imposed on him. And it is those racist white folks that are responsible for the crime of poverty, my beautiful, intelligent black brothers and sisters. Never allow white folks to define poverty to us. Never allow white folks to blame us for our dilapidated communities and our marginalized economics. It is not our fault. Racist white folks are responsible. Too often, the response to deep poverty is, this country is, yes, that is terrible. But that's the way of the world. When it is brought up that perhaps working conditions or wages are unfair, there you are. For centuries, working conditions and wages have been unfair regarding black folks, people that look like me. Workers are simply told that scarcity is the reason for their suffering. Bullshit. Goods, this is what white folks are saying to black folks, goods are simply scarce. Goods are scarce and cannot possibly be provided to everyone if those in need aren't working precisely according to the whims of their white racist employers. Mr. George took a fundamentally different view. In a productive industrial society, the continued existence of poverty is an indictment of the economic structure that white folks rave about all the time. Poverty is a crime. It is not a crime to be poor, but poverty is a crime. And it is the conditions that have been imposed on our ancestors and on us since the inception of this plantation called America that have placed us today in July of 2020 in this marginalized economic status that we're in this disenfranchised political situation that we're in the era of Trump. That's all I have on this one. Please go to thethrasherway.libsyn.com.